Do you find yourself stuck in the same cycle of repeating a pattern that you really don't like and you've really wanted to change it for several years, or you're working on it, but you just can't quite change the behavior? Well, today we are talking about what to do before the behavior happens and how your nervous system and brain get in the way. Listen in. Welcome to Burnout Solutions. My name is Mona Tippett. I am a registered nurse, a life coach, an emotional resiliency expert, and a mom. I love to help healthcare workers and caretakers and just busy, capable people understand their brain and nervous system so stress, overwhelm, and frustration do not run their life. Here on this podcast, we break down burnout, emotional overload, and survival patterns in simple human language. I love to give you practical ways to feel safer, calmer, and more present in your everyday life. You do not need fixing. What you need is support and a nervous system that knows that it's safe. Thanks for being here. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're talking a little bit more about consistency. Last time we talked about how consistency often looks like control and how high achievers often just want to double down, white knuckle, push through, and they think that control is helping them be consistent, but often we see that as a switch on and off and not a dial that we can control. I also talked about how we often feel like what our goals are, we struggle to create. And again, we blame it on discipline. And today I want to talk about how we're not really needing to try harder or be more motivated, but I want to talk about something a little bit deeper. And this is, how do we sabotage ourselves before we even get to the action? And how do we actually make change and accomplish goals? There are lots of ways of doing goals, and all the books and Atomic Habits, and high achievers are high achievers for a reason, right? We are good at being successful, but I don't feel like that success is often sustainable or healthy. And that's why we're talking about this today. We're going to talk about how our predictive patterns, or things that we do and thoughts that we think in several different variations, can actually prevent us from making our goals in a healthy, sustainable way. Often these predictive patterns feel logical and reasonable. They feel like real life. They actually feel like flexibility sometimes. And yet we can often just cycle and end up in the same place regardless of our perfect plan and what we do. So I wanted to start out with just an example that maybe you've experienced. I have recently kind of experienced this because I can now sleep. And in the past, I was always awake in the middle of the night and I would just get up because there's no reason for me to lay there. So I was often just really tired. But now that I'm sleeping, I find myself not getting out of bed when my alarm gets off. And sometimes I hit snooze. And I want you to think, maybe it's early in the morning before a shift and your alarm goes off. Those healthcare workers, we work early. And so it's 5:00 often in the morning. And while you're laying there in your bed, your brain starts to talk like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I should have gone to bed earlier. I didn't sleep well. Maybe the kids were up. Maybe you think of yesterday's shift and how stressful it was. And immediately your thought in your brain comes, okay, I'm just going to lay here for 5 more minutes. And that thought feels totally and completely reasonable, logical, and flexible, and really rational, right? And then your brain starts gathering more evidence. I need the rest. Today's going to be a long day. I really deserve this. This is self-care. I'm really tired. And maybe you hit the snooze button again. And I think for the first few seconds, that actually feels good. You're in your warm bed. It's a quiet house. You are just enjoying that little bit of extra comfort. And then the alarm goes off again. And maybe you're like, oh my goodness, it's already 5:30. And now you're rushing. And so because you're rushing, maybe you skip your workout that you planned and your breakfast becomes, whatever's the easiest to grab. And you're starting the day off already feeling rushed and slightly behind. And this continues on. And by the end of the day, you're probably thinking, okay, this is ridiculous. Why can't I just be more consistent? Why can't I just get out of bed when my alarm clock goes off? And the interesting thing is this, that the real decision wasn't hitting the snooze button. But often that's what we see, right? We see the behavior. The real decision happened a few seconds earlier. Do you remember what happened? There was a conversation that your brain had with you. And in that moment, your brain said something totally believable, and we believed it, right? Your brain is so good at solving problems that it creates these thoughts that are believable, and we don't question them. We believe it. This is what I call the moment before the moment. Most people, again, notice the behavior. They notice, okay, I didn't work out. I ate something bad. I procrastinated. I was snappy at somebody. I didn't take care of my patient the way that I wanted to. I didn't help my coworker, et cetera, et cetera. But the behavior isn't really where the pattern started. It started seconds earlier in the thought, the justification, the story that your brain told, the evidence that it gathered to prove the story true. And those thoughts are really very non-dramatic. They're tiny, they're subtle, they're believable. Like, I'm really overwhelmed right now. I'm so tired. This day is going to be crazy. The traffic is bad. I'm going to be late. And the brain is incredibly good at making those thoughts sound logical. And because they feel logical and sound logical and rational, we follow them. So let's talk for a minute about predictive patterns that predecide your behavior. And here's the key idea. Before the moment arrives, your brain has already practiced the pattern, right? You already laid the track. So when the thought shows up of, I'm tired, I deserve this, I'll start tomorrow, your brain just drives down that familiar road. And it's very easy because we've already practiced those predictive patterns. We've followed them many times. Our brain uses neuroplasticity, and the thoughts that we think over and over again become much easier to think. So when these really subtle thoughts show up, your brain already knows which road to take. It's like you're driving home. You don't have to think about it every single turn, every single stoplight. You know the direction. You've driven the road so many times that your brain just follows the track. And this happens with our habits too. A thought appears, your brain knows what to do, and it follows a familiar road. Part of why this happens is because of how our brain is wired. And our brain follows something called the motivational triad. I use this a lot in my coaching. I've mentioned it in other podcasts. But your brain naturally wants to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. So when that moment comes, and remember, life happens in tiny, tiny micro moments. So in those tiny micro moments, your current self and your current brain zooms in more on immediate relief. It wants to hit the snooze button. It wants to skip the workout. It wants to eat the chocolate. It wants to, avoid the uncomfortable conversation, avoid the uncomfortable task, sit in your chair longer, stare at your phone longer. And in that moment, it feels completely reasonable. But what the brain doesn't calculate well is the long-term cost of that pattern that you are in the middle of at that moment and keep returning to. This is something I see in myself and in so many of my clients, and it's just so interesting to me that we make decisions that feel good for about 10% of the total experience, but the other 90% often creates frustration, regret. I shouldn't have done this. We go into the blame shame trap. So back to the example, when we hit snooze, 10% of that actually does feel good and amazing and wonderful. And yes, resting, except really, are you really resting? No, you're not. You're just laying there. You're not in a deep, restful, rejuvenating sleep. And then when you get up and the rest of the day, you are rushing, right? You skipped something that you had planned to do. You skipped something that was important to you. You already feel behind, and your brain keeps convincing you, for some reason, that 10% relief is worth it. I think about this a lot when I eat. And you may or may not know that I did health coaching for quite some time. And I think about this all the time. And I would tell my clients, like, why are we eating for what our tongue wants? It's because in that moment, the tongue is like, yeah, I for sure want those cookies. And I think about this myself. When I eat a cookie, yeah, it's so yummy, delicious, and amazing. But for how long? You only taste it on your tongue, like while you're eating it. And then after 2 bites, those receptors are numb and you're not really even paying attention to how yummy and delicious it is. You're just eating it. And then your brain says, oh, that was so good, we should eat more, even though it forgot that you aren't even tasting it anymore. And so you eat it and you eat it. And then sometimes you eat so much that your tongue feels too sweet. And so you drink water and you wash all of that away and then you keep eating more. And so your tongue is so deceptive. And 5 minutes later, what are you feeling when you ate that food? Well, if you're like me, I'm like, man, now my stomach hurts. Man, I have a sugar headache. Why did I even eat that? It wasn't even that good. And here it is 5 minutes later, and it has done nothing for me. All I got was enjoyment in that moment of eating it. And that moment was so small, so small. So we do this in so many different areas of our life. And this is because our brain goes through the motivational triad. It wants to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. And I feel like when you are aware of this, you will see it over and over and over again in your life. Okay, so let's talk about your predictive patterns, starting with, guess what? Yes, you're right, your nervous system. I love to talk about this. When people are in hyperarousal, fight or flight, their thinking becomes extreme. They exaggerate the problem. Like, this was the worst thing ever. I can't believe this happened. Did you hear that this person said this to me? Can you believe this patient that I had today? This student was super hard. My husband is driving me bonkers, right? We use these extreme adjectives and we exaggerate. And when we use those, it helps give ourselves permission to eat differently, be snappy with people, et cetera, et cetera. We also, when we're in hyperarousal, we lose perspective. We lose perspective at our long-term goals and what we want to accomplish in favor of immediate outcomes, right? When we yell at people, guess what? They actually often do what we want them to do quickly, but that causes problems in relationships later. When we are in hyperarousal, we are not being curious and saying, what am I missing here? How can I see things from your perspective? We become more reactive. And just being in hyperarousal changes our brain and the foundation of our thoughts. Now, here's an example that I think happens quite frequently in healthcare. Imagine that your shift is starting off a little bit rough. Maybe you didn't sleep well the night before, or maybe you hit snooze, or you were late, there was traffic. And so you already feel a little bit tired, a little bit off, a little bit cranky when you walk in. And your first patient of the day is complicated. Maybe the night shift didn't do everything that they were supposed to, or something crazy happened at 4:30 and they're still trying to wrap everything up. And so you kind of feel like you're behind before you even get started. And then a coworker asks you to help them with something. And then another patient needs something more. And their family comes in and wants to have a big discussion about the plan of care for the day. And then your charting starts to pile up and your cares start to pile up. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, there's just a tiny thought that keeps reappearing saying, I am so behind. I am behind. This is crazy. I am so busy. I can't get caught up. And all of those little thoughts don't feel dramatic. They just feel very true. You're telling the truth. But now those thoughts start shaping everything. They keep you in fight or flight, right? Fight or flight is urgency. It's I have to do this. And I will agree with you. You do have to do those things. But you're rushing through to your next patient. You skip your break that you could have taken, right? You're following your brain planner on your piece of paper or on your phone, whatever. You grab something quick and sugary because it's fast to eat. You feel a little bit more stressed and throughout the day, you just become a little bit more reactive. You're more short with people. You roll your eyes. You have a scowl on your face when you're taking care of your patients. And things just aren't going well. And they continue to be that way because your nervous system is in fight or flight. And all of your thoughts are originating from that zone. And so by the end of your shift, you are exhausted. And because you're exhausted, you skip the workout that you told yourself that you were going to do when you hit the snooze button this morning and you didn't do it then. And you get home and you just eat whatever there's, sugar cookies there and you eat those. And by the end of the day, you're like, what the heck happened? How can I keep doing this? Is this really my life? And then people narrow in on the behavior. But the problem wasn't the food. The problem wasn't you being snappy. The problem wasn't skipping the workout. The problem wasn't even the stressful shift. What was the problem? The problem was those moments that actually mattered happened hours earlier. It was a small thought of, I'm already behind today. I'm so behind. And that thought created a pattern for the entire day. And when you work in healthcare, I'm going to argue this is literally happening every single day. One stressful moment bleeds into the next, into the next. One dysregulated patient affects you, and we are spreading dysregulation at the nurse's station and with everybody that we interact with. One difficult chart or conversation carries over to the next room, and before you know it, your nervous system is running the entire shift, and everybody is dysregulated, and we have contagious stress happening. Now, you need to remember, this is not because you're weak. This is not because you lack discipline. This is not because you are purposely doing this. It is because your brain is following a predictive pattern that it has practiced over and over and over again. It has a predictive pattern of when people get snappy and dysregulated, and when I have to make up for time from the night shift, this is how I handle it best. Now, this doesn't have to be, and this is why I love teaching healthcare workers, is how to interrupt your stress cycle a million times throughout the day. And we're not talking about that right now today, but I want you to see that these are predictive patterns that are not helpful. But we don't see that. We see it as the behavior that we're doing and not the thoughts and the nervous system state that brought us there. Okay, so I wanted to talk about a few predictive patterns that I see in myself and other people. and these patterns really do prevent us from reaching our goals. The ones that I see most are perfectionism, procrastination, and delay. Like, I'm going to start tomorrow, I'll do that later. Next week, that's a good time after vacation, those kind of things. So let's start with perfectionism. So a lot of times we think if we just have the perfect plan to follow and we borrow somebody's perfect plan, then we will be successful. I used to, for a small amount of time, I coached with a company, and they had an eating plan, and that eating plan was the same for every single person. And I thought it was bonkers. I'm like, how can a man who is 6'5" and weighs 200 pounds and he's 40 years old, how can he be on the same eating plan as a woman who is 50 years old, who is 5'1" and, weighs whatever? Like, these are totally different people, different metabolisms, different nutritional needs. And yet I was taught to tell them, this is how you eat at what time, and this is what you eat. And you do get a little bit of wiggle room in the evenings to eat this. And it did bother me, which is why I don't do it anymore. I'm like, that is so rigid. That is so inflexible. That is so like, this is a perfect plan. And if I do this, then I will lose weight. Did it work? It did. I don't think in a healthy way. I don't think they used like the healthiest proteins. Anyway, whatever. I'm not going to go on a tangent about that. But this is how, we always buy systems. We always buy the latest and greatest. I want you to tell me how I should do this exactly. And when we don't do things exactly, we either blame ourselves or shame ourselves, and we fall off the rails. Like, there has to be a little bit of wiggle room, and you need to do what works for you. Okay, let's talk about procrastination. So procrastination is doing something later. My brain is really good at giving me reasons why I should do it later. Like I need to read more. I need to prepare more. I need to get rest more. I need to be in a different position than I am right at this second to be more successful at that. And what it's doing is it's just delaying the task. And this sounds very reasonable and believable to our brain because why? We're not telling ourselves we're never going to do it. We're telling ourselves we will do it. But we assign so many things to our future self that guess what? Once we get to that same place, our future self is now our current self, and our current self suffers from the motivational triad. So that present self doesn't want to do all the assignments that our past self gave to us. And so we delay it again. This also has to do with, I'll start tomorrow. I'll start later. After vacation, I'm going to do this. And this can be, our brain thinks it's a very super helpful thought. And the problem is we are relying on that tomorrow we're going to be in a better position to do it. It's just such a gamble to decide that tomorrow will be easier. But all tomorrows hold unexpected difficulties that we don't even know about. We just assume that tomorrow will be better. And sometimes it's even worse. There's so many things that we have no control over what's going to happen tomorrow. And so I want to say, let's learn to stop dismissing today's justifications for our goals that are happening tomorrow. And often we just carry the stress of knowing in our brain that we didn't do that yesterday, and that continues on from day to day to day, and we get burned out. One of my first jobs in the hospital was I was a unit secretary that floated. That was when they had secretaries. They don't really do that at our hospital anymore. But I would get the charts from the doctors and I would look through them and I would put the orders in the computer. And this is when they had paper charts. I know, so long ago. And I had a secretary train me and she said, whatever is in front of you right now, just do it and move on. Just do it and move on. Unless somebody brings it to you and says, this is stat, you have to do it right now, then do it right then. But otherwise, you have 10 charts. The best way to do it is to grab the one on top, go through everything, and then you don't have to think about it ever again. You know that you've done it and it's put away. And I think about that so much, and I need to implement that more, that I can do it right now and I have the mental energy and just do it so I don't have to keep spinning and having that gnawing task in the back of my brain. Okay, I feel like I'm getting off on a tangent. So let's move into just a few practical tools on how to interrupt predictive patterns. And let's talk about some solutions. So the first one I came up with is tool number 1. Notice the nervous system state that you are in, because your nervous system state is the foundation of all of your thoughts. When you are dysregulated, when you are in distress, your brain produces distorted thinking. So when you are in this pattern or in this state, do not believe the thoughts immediately that your brain offers you. What you could do, and what I encourage you to do, is pause and say, okay, what state am I in right now? Am I overwhelmed? Am I rushed? Am I irritated? Am I exhausted? Am I shut down? Do I feel burned out? Because when you're dysregulated, those thoughts are often not reliable information, right? They are coming from distress and fear and shutdown, and they are trying to protect you. And so they are protective reactions of thinking. Tool number 2, stop believing your brain one step sooner. Most people believe their brain all the way to the behavior. So we have a thought. Sometimes we justify, rationalize, make it sound super true, or we exaggerate, and then we have a behavior. So what if you were to practice interrupting that a little bit earlier? When the thought appears, like, I deserve this, I'll start tomorrow, the day's already ruined, I'm so far behind, instead of immediately agreeing with it, pause and say, okay, maybe this is my predictive pattern and not my protective nervous state stepping in. And so when we can just name and be aware, it weakens that power. Tool number 3 is zoom out from that moment. Predictive patterns trap you in the moment, and they make you feel like the short-term relief is worth it, right? Motivational triad. So instead, ask yourself, if I follow this pattern, where does it take me? I've done this before, right? I've seen how this movie ends. I already know what happens because this is predictive and my brain is choosing it and it's on default. And it takes me back to the same result that I've had over and over and over again. And I get the same frustration, the same stress. I'm still making the same goals. One of my goals that I've made, seriously, for 20 years is to be fluent in Spanish. I actually tried to make some progress just last year and hired a Spanish tutor. But whatever, I stopped doing it. And guess what? I still want to be fluent in Spanish. So I need to do something about that or just drop it and say, okay, I'm not going to. Anyway, zooming out does help our brain connect with the bigger picture. The last tool that I highly recommend, and I use this all the time more than anything, is to get yourself a coach. I have experienced therapy and counseling and whatever, everything. And I love working with a coach because they are like a mirror. They help personalize a plan for me. I am very aware of, our nervous system patterns and our states and our thoughts. And I believe that a personalized plan that is very incremental, very subtle, very tiny micro steps creates sustainable change that gradually creates different predictive patterns. And in my experience, has been way more successful. So I love doing that. I love helping people do that. I do it with groups and one-on-one, and I present at offices and for staff. And I love just being a coach. I love helping people see what's going on. I love helping offices see, okay, this is a predictive pattern inside this office based on the personalities that are here. How can we change that? How can we interrupt? And how can we shift the dynamics and the culture of this office? That's what I love. So you can reach out to me on my website and I can work that out with you. Okay, so closing message. Consistency isn't about trying harder. It's not about controlling more. It's not a switch. It's a dial that gradually we change. It's about flexibility, keeping us in the game. And it's about understanding the patterns that quietly drive our decisions. It's the small thoughts. It's the believable excuses that are totally logical and feel very, very true in that moment. The nervous system states that help shape your perspective affect your consistency. And when you start noticing all of those predictive patterns, you don't have to fight yourself so hard anymore because you start creating a new track that is gradual. And when that track changes, consistency becomes a lot easier. So I hope you learned something. I would love to know. Send me a message. I do read them. And thanks for listening. If you found this helpful, please share it with those around you. Rate and review on Apple or Spotify. And I'd love to help you. So let's make that a reality. Bye-bye. Every week, you're learning something new here on this podcast, and that is a powerful first step. But guess what? Information alone doesn't create transformation. True change happens when you start to think differently and shift the nervous system patterns that drive your behavior. As a coach and an emotional resiliency expert, that is the work I do. I love to walk alongside you, whether it's one-on-one, in a small group that you choose, or with your workplace team. I can help you retrain your brain and nervous system so that stress no longer runs the show. You'll find ways to connect with me in the show notes. Let's do this work together.